First of all, I want to dedicate the Shiur in the memory of Rabbi Hertz of blessed memory, and Rabbi Yitzchak Meir, and Rabbi Dalia Zichreinu L'Bracha, who passed away this past Friday. We are moving in the direction of Yud Beis Tammuz. This Shabbos is the 12th of Tammuz, which is the festival of liberation of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, from communist prison 99 years ago. And he displayed incredible Mesiras Nefesh, incredible self-sacrifice for keeping Yiddishkeit alive in Soviet Russia, despite all the attempts that were made by the communists to obliterate Yiddishkeit. And commemorating his achievements is a tremendous source of strength for each and every one of us to cope with the various challenges that we face in whatever situation we find ourselves. I'll just give a short synopsis of what took place. We know that after the Bolshevik Revolution, the establishment of communism in the Soviet Union, so there was a tremendous effort made to capture the minds of the people and get them all fired up about communism. It's the only way it can work, because you have to get people to be happy to give away everything that they have for the sake of,
like New York now.
and it takes a lot of mind twisting to be able to achieve that. So one of the things that they wanted to obliterate was religious education, because if you're taught that there's other purposes in life and other values in life other than communism, you're not going to be properly dedicated to the values of communism. So, and especially the Jewish section of the communist movement dedicated themselves very strongly to obliterating Jewish education. They felt that communism is the Messiah, and the old-fashioned Jews that are holding on to Yiddishkeit are the ones that are holding up the redemption. So they did everything possible to obliterate Yiddishkeit. Wherever there was a cheder, to shut down the cheder. Wherever there was a shul, to close down the shul. Whenever there was a yeshiva, close down the yeshiva. Where there was a mikveh, to close down the mikveh. Where there was shchita, to close down shchita. And they were so ruthless and so totalitarian that no one could stand up against them. And many Jewish leaders just threw up their hands and said, nothing we can do. It's a lost case. But there was one man who stood up very, very powerfully against them. And that was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who stood up very, very firmly and against the attempts of the communists to obliterate Yiddishkeit. And he spoke publicly, and he set up a movement supporting financially all institutions of Jewish education, institutions of Judaism, and sent his shluchim to establish chadarim and to establish yeshivas and to open it wherever mikveh was closed, to reopen it wherever shchita was shut down, to get shchita reestablished, and to inspire Yidden across the breadth of the Soviet Union to be strong in their commitment to Yiddishkeit and not to allow the communists to shut down Yiddishkeit. And when Friedrich Rebbe was warned by the communist regime that he has to stop this activity because it goes against everything that they're interested in implementing. And if he doesn't stop it, they're going to take very strong steps to stop him. And he didn't take any notice of their warnings. And in fact, finally, on the night between the 14th and the 15th of Sivan of 1927, that's 99 years ago, I came to his home at 12:30 at night. We had just finished receiving people for private audiences and davened Ma'ariv, and sat down at 12 o'clock at night with his family for supper. In the middle of supper, the bell rang very strongly, and in marched a whole group of armed soldiers, led by two officers who were incidentally Jews, descendants of Hasidim, who were now very strong communists, and they led the team to come and arrest the Rebbe and to take him to a very, very severe prison. The name of the prison was Shpalerke, Leningrad, which is very, very, very known as an awesome prison. And initially their intention was to shoot him right away. But miraculously, there's a lot of things that happened that night that prevented that from happening. They had to put him on some kind of a trial, investigate, interrogate. In the meantime, there was all different kinds of pressures coming in, and the Frierdiker Rebbe writes a diary describing his experiences in prison. It's fascinating and quite frightening. And he was kept in a cell which was intended for one prisoner, but there were actually 4 prisoners bunched up there in July heat in Leningrad. And Frierdiker Rebbe, despite the heat and despite the fact that he was running a temperature, he declared a hunger strike until he gets his tefillin. So it said not a drop of water would enter his mouth until he gets his tefillin. He maintained this hunger strike, tefillin, and he maintained this hunger strike for about a day and a half until he was given his tefillin. And so about 2 weeks later, on Thursday, Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. I'm skipping over a lot of the events that took place over there. But 2 weeks later, on Thursday, Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, a group of guards came into his cell and told him to rise. Now, one of the things that in principle, he would not show any respect for the regime, which was to destroy Yiddishkeit, that he represented defending Yiddishkeit. So he didn't want to show any respect for the regime, and therefore, when he was told to rise, he didn't rise. So they told him that if you don't rise, we're going to beat you. So he said no. So they kept their word. They beat him, and they left the cell. Short while later, another group of guards came in. Again, they instructed him to rise, and again he refused to rise, and again they beat him. And the third time, a group of guards came in. The same thing repeated itself again. This time, one of the guards was Jewish, and he said to the Rebbe, "Mir velnach onlernen, we'll teach you a lesson." And the Rebbe said to him, "Mir vonzen ver vemen, we will see who will teach whom the lesson." And after him refusing to rise a third time, they beat him a third time. And from one of those beatings, he was injured in the chin. That suffered from that for a very long time. And then they came in and told him that he should come into the office. So he came into the office, that he did, cooperated with that. And he went into the office. He saw over there on the desk his case documents. And first it said death by firing squad. Then that was crossed out. In other words, that was the initial plan. That was crossed out. Miraculously, that was suspended. That was changed. Instead, it said 10 years hard labor in the Isles of Solovki, some kind of a prison camp. And that was, it said next to that, Niet. That was rejected. And then it said 3 years exile in Kostroma. Kostroma was a remote place 24 hours by train from Leningrad. Russia's a massive country. I mean, in England, you can't talk about going anywhere 24 hours by train because there isn't anywhere to go 24 hours by train. The country isn't big enough. Russia is so immense, so vast, that it's placed 24 hours by train from Leningrad called Kostroma, very remote, very small Jewish community there. And it was 3 years of exile in Kostroma. They told him that they're going to allow him to go home and spend 6 hours at home with his family. And that evening, he has to report to the train station in Leningrad, and he's going to board a train to Kostroma, where he's going to spend 3 years in exile. And their intention was to keep him away from the vast multitude of the Jewish community, so he won't be able to have any influence on anyone. So the first question he asked was, when do I arrive in Kostroma? So he was told, if you leave Thursday night, it's 24 hours, you'll arrive Friday night. So he said, Shabbos, I will not travel under any circumstances. Even though Al Pi Halacha, he definitely would be allowed to travel on Shabbos to get out of his prison. It was every minute being there was danger to life, as he describes in his diary about the firing squads and how the night went through and how On one hand, there was a curfew, you had to be lying flat after a certain time. And after about an hour after that, they started with the firing squads, and they started calling people out of the cells. Huh?
Instead of goodness.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot of fun. And every minute of staying in that prison was a danger to life. So Allah, he surely was allowed to travel on Shabbos to get out of that prison. But he knew that they specifically arranged it in such a way that you should travel on Shabbos so they can brag and say, we forced the Lubavitcher Rebbe to travel on Shabbos. He didn't want that to happen. So if he said, Shabbos, I'm not traveling under any circumstances. And after various negotiations that took place, it was agreed that he would be allowed to voluntarily stay in prison until Sunday, because they wouldn't let him stay more than 6 hours at home. So they allowed him to voluntarily stay in prison until Sunday, which is an amazing miracle for itself, because just like nobody asks you when you want to come to prison, nobody asks you when you want to leave prison. It's the kind of place where when they bring you in, you're in, and when they send you out, you're out. But here they agreed to allow him to stay voluntarily in prison until Sunday, which was the 3rd of Tammuz. And on Sunday, they released him to go home for 6 hours and to report on Sunday evening in the train station in Leningrad to board a train to Kostroma. Now, when he came to the train station in Leningrad on Sunday evening, he met over there many people that came to see him off. So there was a large crowd of people that came to see him off. Each one of them was endangering their life because they could have rounded them off, they could have arrested them all, they could have done anything they wanted. But people came to the train station to see off the Rebbe, and the Rebbe spoke at the platform on the train station. He spoke a sikha. He gave a talk. And the theme of his talk was strengthening Yidden and encourage them not to take notice of the various decrees of the government. And he actually explained things. He explained it very rationally. He said that it's not with our will that we've gone into Golus, and it's not with our will that we will go out of Golus. Our Hashem expelled us into Golus, and Hashem will redeem us from Golus. But all the nations of the world need to know that only our bodies are in exile. Our souls were never sent to exile, which means that if the nations wanted to make decrees upon us, they can make decrees upon us, but only on our bodies. In other words, take, for example, if the British government should tomorrow decide to make a Jew tax, every Jew has to pay an additional £100 a month tax. It would be considered terribly anti-Semitic. We would be very upset, but they have the right to do it. We're in Golus, under their jurisdiction, and if they decide to make a decree against us, we have to accept it. However, that's only as far as financially, as far as bodily matters are concerned, physical matters are concerned, but as far as our souls are concerned, our souls were never sent into exile, and they were never given over to the nations of the world. So they have to know that they have no business meddling in our religious observance. It's none of their business how we educate our children. It's none of their business how we could keep our religion. And they have no business meddling in our religious observances. And therefore, we have no obligation to listen to them when they meddle in our religious observances. And this is what he spoke about in the train station in Leningrad in 1927, fearlessly. I mean, according to the natural rules, they would have shot him, they should have mowed him down on the spot. But he spoke fearlessly, and then he boarded the train and went to Kostroma. The Rebbetzin Chayamushka, his daughter, accompanied him. And over there, he was able to stay in an apartment of his own. However, once a week, he had to report to the local police station just to establish that he's still there. And so the first Tuesday, he arrived there on Monday night. And a week later, on Tuesday, he went to report at the police station. This was the 12th of Tammuz. And he was told that an instruction had come from the central government in Moscow to liberate him, to free him, to allow him to go back home. But because that day was why? It was the Eibishter that runs the world. Various connections were used and various pressures were put, but it didn't, according to the rules of nature, none of those pressures could have had any effect. The Red Cross was involved. There were various organizations that were involved. But the fact is that it told them that on Tuesday, the 12th of Tammuz, they told him that an instruction had come from central government in Moscow to liberate him. But because it was holiday, a legal holiday in that place in Kastamon. They couldn't give him the documentation that was required. And he needed to come back the next day on Wednesday, the 13th of Tammuz, to receive the documentation, and which he did. And so we celebrate both days, the 12th and the 13th. The 12th is the day that he received the news that he was liberated, and the 13th, the day that he got the documentation that actually allowed him to leave Kostroma and to make his way back to Leningrad. And when he arrived back in Leningrad, just before Shabbos, he was informed that the local, although the central government in Moscow had liberated him, but the local government in Leningrad was still intent on rearresting. And so the only way that he could be safe was by leaving the country. Now, you can't just pick yourself up and leave the Soviet Union. So he needed to apply for permission to leave the Soviet Union, and they had to very cleverly orchestrate how that could happen. And there's a whole story with the Latvian government being brought into the picture. And the end is that it officially worked out that the Jewish community in Riga invited him to become their chief rabbi. And the Latvian government put pressure on the Russian government to cooperate. And when Friedrich Rebbe was given permission to leave, he said he could only leave if he's allowed to take an entourage with him. He needs his secretaries, he needs his, and he also requires to take his library with him. And there was resistance, but ultimately they agreed to the whole list of entourage that he gave, including the right to take his entire library with him. And one of the interesting episodes in this part of the story is that when he gave him a list of the people that would need to come with him, so next to each name he had to write the reason what their relationship with him was, or why he needed them to come with him. This was his secretary, and this was his librarian, whatever. Everybody needed to have some kind of a role, and his family, of course, his mother, his wife, his daughters, his son-in-law, grandson, whatever. But then by the Rebbe, he wrote future son-in-law. The Rebbe and the Rebbe were engaged in. So the authorities said, a future son-in-law, that's not a reason to take him out of Russia. You'll find another son-in-law on the other side of the border. So he said, such a son-in-law you can't find anywhere. And they gave permission. And so it turned out that this imprisonment, in the long term, with all the suffering that he endured, in the long term, this is what enabled him to leave Russia. And both as far as Judaism and the Soviet Union was concerned, he was in a much stronger position to fight to help the Jews in the Soviet Union from outside the country, to raise funds that were necessary to do what was being done in the Soviet Union. From outside the country, he was in a much better position, plus to use his influence not only in the Soviet Union, but also to use his influence throughout the free world. So Lubavitch became not just a movement that was fighting communism, but it became a movement that illuminated the world with the light of Yiddishkeit. And it all comes from that, from that evil intention to arrest the Rebbe and to eliminate the Rebbe that came from the communists. So the darkness was transformed into light.
Why were Jews so complicit in the conflict?
I think, simply speaking, under the Tsar there was tremendous persecution. There was poverty, and there was persecution, and Jews were not given the same rights as everybody else. There was the Pale of Settlement, where Jews weren't allowed to live, and where they were allowed to live, where they weren't allowed to live, and there were all kinds of restrictions on Jews, and there were pogroms, and people didn't see a future. And then suddenly this brilliant idea came up that everybody's going to be equal. There's not going to be any difference between Jews and Christians and Muslims. They're all going to become the same, and everybody's going to have abundant sustenance, because we're going to take all the money from the rich people and distribute it to everybody equally. It's going to be mamish. It's going to be Mashiach. Could you think of anything better? And a couple of old, stubborn Frumme Yidden said, no, there's something much more important than that, and that is Yiddishkeit. And it's not, Yiddishkeit can't go ahead with this. We're not interested.
They didn't perceive the evil.
I don't think anybody perceived the evil. I think people. The fact is that the majority of people in the Soviet Union backed communism. That's why they were successful in making a revolution, right?
So Marx was actually Jewish.
Yeah.
So a lot of the revolution was communist.
Sure. It took many years until people realized that it's not going to work, and that every situation, especially where people are so dependent on the government, is an extra opportunity for anti-Semitism in a way that nobody could have imagined. And also the fact that at the time there was a very strong Yefsektia, was the Hebrew section, Jewish section of the communist movement. They were the biggest troublemakers. They're the ones who really decided that they must obliterate all of Yiddishkeit, not leave any. They didn't mean to be anti-Semitic. They just meant they were just anti-religious. They felt that they were more enlightened than the religious, and they were cleverer, and they could solve everybody's problem.
My mother's maternal grandfather was ripped off the streets and was made to serve. Yet,
this was under the Tsar or under the communists? Under the Tsar.
He lived in.
Fine. So you see what the Jews were enduring under the Tsar.
I mean, the irony is he was the personal bodyguard of the Tsar in one of his estates. Yeah, but when my grandfather came to this country, my mother said across the wall was pictures of all the communist leaders. That's what I don't know why he came here, but it's important communist leaders.
Anyway, I don't have all the answers, but it was tough.
Yeah.
Can't judge them. Sure.
This endemic anti-Semitism that sits in the Ukrainians and Russians back from the time of the Tsar. I met a guy at the airport and he said the Ukrainians aren't like that.
Probably some never were, some were and aren't, and some were and still are.
Was it just the times, or is it in a person's soul?
Halacha Esav Soinei. It's a reality. How much that reality manifests itself in actual varies. Depends which way the wind is blowing. You see what's going on in the world. Anyway, so that is, and when the Frierdiker Rebbe was liberated on Yud Beis Tammuz, actually, I'll share with you something very fascinating. My father, Olav Shalom, was born in 1921. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested in 1927. He was 6 years old. He remembered as a child, he lived in a town called Dukshitz, outside of the Iron Curtain. It was essentially White Russia, but it belonged to Poland at the time. And but he remembered as a child, one of his memories as a child that stood out very strongly was when the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested, the entire town gathered together in shul to say the whole Tehillim. And he remembered that event very clearly. And then the following year, the first Yud Beis Tammuz happened on a Tuesday, as I mentioned before. But the following year, it fell on Shabbos, like this year. And that was the first anniversary of the Frierdiker Rebbe's liberation. So my father remembered as a 7-year-old boy that generally in his shtetl, kiddushim were held in private homes. He didn't have a kiddush in shul on Shabbos. Somebody made a kiddush, they made a kiddush in their private home. However, when it came to Yud Beis Tammuz, Shabbos Yud Beis Tammuz, they made a kiddush in shul. So everybody must have contributed or whatever, but kiddush was in shul. And my father remembered that kiddush was a momentous occasion, the first anniversary of the Frierdiker Rebbe's liberation. And my Zayder was the sheikhet of the shtetl, and the Rav of the shtetl were both Chassidim of Lubavitch. And so my father remembered this as a child, how his father, the sheikhet, and the Rav were dancing on the table at that kiddush. And the impact that it made on him, on one hand, the anguish that there was at the time the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested, how the whole town got together to say the entire Torah, and the simcha that there was at the Frierdiker Rebbe's liberation, that made such an impact on a young child. So the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a letter, and I believe he wrote it on occasion of the first anniversary. And in his letter he writes, it's not just me alone that Hashem liberated on the 12th of Tammuz. but rather kol mechavavei Torah, anyone who cherishes Torah, v'shem mitzvah and guards mitzvahs, and v'chol gam kol asher b'shem Yisrael yichuna, and also anyone who allows himself to even be nicknamed Yisrael, a Jew. Anyone who has any relationship with Judaism, even to the point where they consider that their secondary identity, they were liberated on Yud Beis Tammuz, meaning that this liberation enabled them to find a new connection to their Yiddishkeit, a new strength to be able to connect their Yiddishkeit in a way that they could never have before. So it's a very, very meaningful day, because that liberation gave a tremendous push to anyone who wanted to have any connection to Yiddishkeit at any level, and considering the dangers that were involved then. And so that liberation gave the strength to everyone to be able to arouse their neshama and connect to Hashem. And you see that even as far as the Soviet Union itself is concerned, the Soviet Union has collapsed. And the Rebbe, at the time, when you looked at things, you had Stalin, the most mighty government in the world, mighty armies and secret police, with totalitarian regime, with ruthless tortures and prisons and everything. And one Rebbe, a little man who was standing up against this mighty regime. It didn't sound like it stood a chance at any level. And then you look 99 years later, communism is long gone, Stalin is long gone, and what has survived and thrived is what the Rebbe stood for. And not only throughout the world is Yiddishkeit thriving, but in the former Soviet Union, Yiddishkeit is thriving. There's yeshivas, there's shuls, there's communities, there's mikvahs, there's bris milah, there's everything. Everything that Stalin tried to obliterate and the Yevseki tried to obliterate is growing in leaps and bounds in their own backyard. So it's a tremendous chizuk when we face certain challenges and we think, who knows how this is going to be, and it's the end of it, and ultimately Yiddishkeit is eternal. We say, when Avraham Avinu stood up to Nimrod, Nimrod was a very powerful king. Avraham Avinu was a little boy. Nimrod said, you have to serve idols. Avraham Avinu said, no, you have to serve one God. And Nimrod said, I could take this Avraham Avinu and throw him into the furnace, and then the end of him. So, what chance did Avraham Avinu have? Today, 3,000 years later, how many people get up every morning and say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, blessed are you Hashem, the God of Avraham, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov. How many people do you know that get up in the morning and say, Baruch atah Elokei Nimrod, blessed are you, the God of Nimrod? You haven't met such a person. And similarly, in connection with Yud Beis Tammuz, how many people today are devoting their lives to the mission that was encouraged and launched by the Frierdiker Rebbe, later carried on by the Rebbe, and how many people are devoting their lives to propagating Stalin's message?
What about liberation? It becomes America.
So there's things like this. He left Russia and moved to Riga in Latvia. That was right after Yom Tov, right after Sukkot. So from Yud Beis Tammuz till Sukkot, few months. But they had to organize it. They had to get permission. And he lived in Latvia for 3 years. The majority of the time of which he wasn't there. Because during that time, he spent he journeyed to the United States. He was in the United States visiting for almost a year. And he was journeyed to Eretz Yisrael. And he was in Poland. His residence was in Latvia, but he was traveling around. After 3 years of living in Latvia, he applied for Latvian citizenship. The law in Latvia was that after 3 years of living there as an immigrant, you could apply for citizenship. So he applied for Latvian citizenship. He got Latvian citizenship. And as soon as he got the Latvian citizenship, he moved out of Latvia. And he moved to Warsaw, to a suburb of Warsaw, Plock. And that's where the central Babis Yeshiva was at the time. And that's where the Rebbe's wedding, he was still living in Riga at the time of the Rebbe's wedding. But after that, he settled in Warsaw. And he was in Warsaw when Warsaw was invaded by the Nazis. And it was through his Latvian citizenship that he was able to, according to the rules of nature, that was able to save him from the Holocaust. Because through the Latvian embassy, he was able to be he and his family were able to be saved. It's a whole story in itself.
But the Rebbitzin sister, no.
Right, because she was married to a Polish citizen. There was a whole different story. I mean, they tried very, very hard, even after coming to America, and then after he was gotten out of Warsaw and got to Riga. From there, he journeyed onward to Sweden, and from Sweden, made a trip to America. And that's when 1940. That's when he moved to.
That's 1940.
Yeah. So the first time he came to America for a visit
so
was
it's 12 years.
Yeah, right. Because he lived in Riga and in Poland for all those years. He visited America in 1929, and he concluded that America wasn't ready. I mean, he was there for nearly a year. He traveled around the whole breadth of America, strengthening Yiddish cardinal communities.
You didn't tell about this book.
Undaunted.
It's all in the book, yeah.
Undaunted.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal book. Anyway, to mention something on the Seder, at least in short. So there's two Seders this week, Chukas and Balak. This week we catch up to Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, they lay only Balak this week, because they were a Seder ahead of us, and now we catch up because we do Chukas and Balak this week. So in Chukas begins with the word Zois Chukas HaTorah. Literally means this is the statutes of the Torah. The Alter Rebbe in the Torah points out that the word Chukah comes from the word Chakika, engraved. There's two ways of have letters that are written on parchment, and you have the letters in the tablets that are engraved into the tablets. The difference is when you have letters written on parchment, there's two entities. There's the letters, the writing, and the parchment. And they could theoretically become severed from each other. When you have letters engraved into a tablet, the letters and the tablet that they're engraved into are one entity. There isn't two different things here, and therefore they can never become separated. The Zois Chukas HaTorah alludes to, the meaning that it alludes to is that Torah needs to be related to in a way of Chakika, that becomes engraved in our lives, that we and Torah become one entity. Not that we exist and we also subscribe to Torah, but that Torah has to be who we are. Torah and Yiddishkeit is who we are. It's also alluded to in the famous story when Eliezer went to find a wife for Yitzchak. And he meets Rivka, so he gives her various gifts. One of the gifts that he gave her was 2 bracelets that had a weight of 10 golden coins. So Rashi points out, based on the Medrash, what's the 2 bracelets and the 10 golden coins? So the 2 bracelets correspond to the 2 tablets. And the 10 golden coins correspond to the 10 commandments. So the message that he was trying to give Rivka was that she and Yitzchak are going to build a home that's going to be a Torah home, based on the values of Torah, based on the values of the 2 tablets and the 10 commandments. But the question is, there are many numbers that are associated with Torah. There's 5 Chumashim, there's 53 Seders, there's 6 volumes of Mishnah, there's 60 volumes of Talmud, and there's so many different numbers that can be associated with Torah. Why only these 2 numbers, 2 and 10? And the answer is that the message that Eliezer had to give Rivka wasn't just that they were going to build a Torah home. They were going to build a home where Torah is engraved in their lives. Like the tablets of stone, the 2 tablets of stone with the 10 commandments are engraved into them. It's not that there's going to be our life. In our life, we're going to have some Torah. Our life is going to be Torah. That's the idea of Chukas HaTorah, the Torah being engraved in our lives. And a similar idea you have in Parshas Balak, in the blessings that Bilam wanted to curse the Jewish people, but Hashem, out of his love for the Jewish people, transformed Bilam's curses into blessings. One of the blessings that one of the words that Bilam says in his blessings, one of the lines that he uses is, that I see the Jewish people from the top of rocks, and from hills I view them. And our sages explain that the rocks refer to the patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And the hills represent Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, the Imais, the matriarchs. So the Jewish people are the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. So Bilam looks at the Jewish people and he sees how they are an expression of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. So how can anybody start with them? That's the idea. So the Gemara says that Bilam was a descendant of Lavan. Lavan, father of Rachel and Leah. Bilam was a descendant of Lavan. And Lavan, at one point, said, That the daughters are my daughters and the sons are my sons. In other words, he said that the children of Yaakov, they're his children, they're his grandchildren, right? So how could Yaakov suspect that he would do anything to them, he would harm them in any way? They're my children, he said. Yeah. So Lavan claimed that the Jewish people are his children. So it was necessary for Bilam, the descendant of Lavan, to undo that statement and say, I see them from the top of rocks and from the top of hills, meaning that the Jewish people are not the children of Lavan. They're the children of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. They have nothing to do with Lavan. So it needed a descendant of Lavan to make that statement. That we have nothing to do with Lavan. We are the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. So the question is, it's such an obvious thing. Why do you need Bilam to say that? Take a look at a Jew standing in shul and davening in talis and film, kapana, and ask anybody, does he look like a descendant of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or a descendant of Lavan? Take a Jewish woman that's standing by the Shabbos table, lighting Shabbos candles, with her eyes covered and speaking a tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does she look like? A descendant of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, or a descendant of Lavan? It's ridiculous to think that the Jewish people are descendants of Lavan. The Jewish people are descendants of Rabbi, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Why do you need Lavan to come? Why do you need Bilam, who's a descendant of Lavan, to make that statement? So the answer is, the way it's explained in Chassidus, is that Bilam understood that when a Jew is davening, when a Jew is learning Torah, when a Jew is doing a mitzvah, of course he has nothing to do with Lavan. However, Lavan's claim was that when a Jew is going about his mundane activities, when he's doing his shopping, when he's doing his exercise, when he's playing sports, when he's eating, when he's sleeping, then he is a descendant of Lavan. When you daven and you learn and you give tzedakah, then you're a descendant of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. But when you're going about your mundane activities, you're a descendant of Lavan. You look just like Lavan. Why not? You're doing exactly the same things Lavan did. So Bilam got up there and said, when I look at the Jewish people at any time, I see them from the top of rocks and the top of hills. From the hills, I view them, meaning I see in every Jew, in everything that he does, that he's a descendant of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Because not only when a Jew davens and learns and does mitzvahs is he a descendant of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, but even when he eats and sleeps and does business or exercises or goes shopping or whatever it is, he's doing it like a Jew. He's doing it for the sake of serving Hashem. There is no other identity in the life of a Jew other than his mission to serve Hashem. And therefore, everything that exists in the life of a Jew is godliness. As we said before, that Torah is not just written into our lives, it's engraved into our lives. That is who we are. And therefore, that doesn't only influence the way we serve Hashem. Judaism is not a religion, it's a way of life. It permeates every single aspect of our lives. The Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah connection permeate every single aspect of our lives.
Question, so it's therefore that Balak was from Moab.
Yes.
So we're talking about 3 parts of one family, the strange.
Yeah. Right.
So where is the Laban? Where is the Laban?
Sorry?
Where is the Laban?
Who is Lavan a descendant of? What's the question?
Yeah. What's the...
Lavan was a nephew of Avraham Avinu. He was a descendant of Besuel.
Yeah.
He was the son of Besuel, the son of Nachor.
When we do all the mitzvahs at the same, so just completely obliterated.
So yeah, we have nothing to do with him because both in our Torah and mitzvahs, which is obvious that we have nothing to do with Lavan, and also in our mundane activity, since our mundane activity is Kol Masechel L'Shem Shamayim, all your deeds are for the sake of heaven, and all your ways you know Hashem. So you're mirroring Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah in every aspect of your life. So this was Bilam's statement, saying that Lavan's claim that Abanis B'naisei, Abanim Banai, that the daughters are my daughters and the sons are my sons, is completely rejected. Because in every aspect of a Jew's life, he is a descendant of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, and nothing else. Okay, we're going to move on to Tanya. I believe we're up to Perek Zayin. Right, I think we finished Perek Vav last week, is that right?
Just do the last one for the practice.
Didn't we finish? We didn't finish chapter 6 last week. We didn't speak about the two types of klippos. We just did the Haggadah. Okay, so where we're up to at the end after the Haggadah, top of page Yud Aleph.
What page is it?
Ela Shah Klippos. Yud Aleph on top of the page and 26 on the bottom of the page. Yes, on the top line. Ela Shah Klippos. So we spoke about Kedusha and Klippa. We spoke about Kedusha, holiness, and Klippa, unholiness. And we explained how that which is the purpose of creation, that which is subservient to Hashem, attracts Hashem's presence in a revealed way. That's Kedusha. And everything else is Klippa, like the husk around the fruit. The fruit is the purpose of the exercise, and the shell or the husk around the fruit is only there to create the right environment for the fruit to grow, but ultimately it gets chucked away. So that's Kedusha and Klippa. So this seems to imply that everything which is not Kedusha is all in one boat. Whether it's kosher food with a Kedasya Hechsher, or it's a ham sandwich from McDonald's, it's exactly the same. It's Klippa. But that's not the case. There is a very big difference. And therefore he continues and says, El Shah Klippas and Nechlakos L'shtei Madregas. Just that Klippa is divided into two categories. Zu l'mata mizu. One category lower than the other. Hamadrega hatachtaina, the lower category, he sholosh klippas atmeis v'rois lagam, are the three klippas that are totally impure and totally evil. Ein b'em teif klal, there's no potential for good there whatsoever. That is the three totally impure klippas. The nikru b'merkavas Yecheskel, they are referred to in the chariot of the prophet Yecheskel, Ezekiel. Ruach Sa'ara, he talks about a storm wind, v'anun gadol, and a great cloud, v'goymer, etc. Over there it says v'eish mislakachas, and a flaming fire. So these three descriptions, the storm wind and the great cloud and the flaming fire, they are the three klippas, they represent the three klippas that are totally impure. So everything that has no potential to be elevated to Kedusha is included in these three klippas. Mehem nishbais v'nimshachais nafshais kolum v'sa'ila. The kiyum gufam. So from these levels come, you have something in the human kingdom, in the animal kingdom, and in the vegetable kingdom, as we'll see, as well as the daimim, as well as the still. So So from the souls of the nations of the world and the sustenance of their bodies comes from shalosh klipos atmeis. That's from the human kingdom. The nafshes kol balachayim atmeim, the souls of all non-kosher animals. That were forbidden to eat, v'kiyum gufam, and sustenance of their bodies. That's also from shalosh klipos atmeis. V'kiyum v'chayis kol macholos asuros mehatzemeach, and what keeps alive, gives sustenance to all forbidden fruits from the vegetable kingdom. My arla, is the first 3 years of a tree that provides fruits during the first 3 years of its existence. Those fruits are forbidden. The kilei hakedim, or if you have a mixture of grain and vineyard. So if you plant grain in a vineyard right next to the vine, that becomes forbidden as kilei hakerim, the mixture within a vineyard. So there are things from the vegetable kingdom that are non-kosher. As quoting from the works of the Arizal in Eitz Chaim, Portal 49, chapter 6. So that is three different categories that come from shalosh klipos atmeis. Now we mentioned before that there's also a fourth category, which is the still. Is that what you wanted to ask?
What's wrong with grain growing underneath a grapevine?
The Torah says, you're not allowed to sow in your vineyard a mixture of grain and vineyard together. If you do, it's not kosher.
The avera is sowing it.
Sowing is the avera, but anything that grows as a result of that sowing is forbidden.
This is just a weird yellow seed.
So there's an entire Masechta Kelayim that goes into the details of what the halachas are. Basically, it becomes nullified 1 in 200.
And both the grape and
Both the grape and the grain become non-kosher. Yeah.
I thought it was because wine, grape is used, it shows they for things special that coat the
It could be. The Torah doesn't say a reason. It could be that there are various reasons given in Svarim, but basically it's a chayt.
But I heard it's anything because that's a tradition.
There is various levels of kilai. There's mixing fruits, grafting fruits together. There's grafting vegetables together. There's putting in, but the most severe is putting grain in a vineyard. That's kilai, and then over there it remains forbidden, and it applies in straw, chutzlar. It's abundant, the nicer. So it's great.
So I heard this, I would say, potatoes in between, which makes them not cook because it's anything.
I'm not sure about that.
That's well,
Could be. I'm not so well versed in halachah kilayim, so I'm not going to attempt to answer that. But I know that there are certain forms of kilayim which you're not allowed to do, but what grows from it is okay. Like, for example, you can eat a nectarine even though it comes from a plum and a peach grafted together. You shouldn't graft them, but if they are grafted and you have the finished product, it's kosher. In the case of the grain growing in a vineyard, it makes it non-kosher.
What's the position these days in most orchards, commercial orchards? There's not a different type. It's in the apples. The apple fruit-bearing part is grafted onto a root from something that grows from another apple that grows more vigorously. Both plants are apple, but what is the halachic position?
As far as eating it is concerned, or as far as doing it is concerned?
Both.
As far as eating is concerned, there's no shiloh whatsoever. No matter what happens to the fruits, there's no shilohs on the grafted fruits. As far as eating is concerned. As far as what you're allowed to do, my guess would be, but if it's negei l'maisa, you should check with a rav. My guess would be that if it's apples, it's okay. But if it's different species mixed with apples, it shouldn't be done.
Because you can buy as well these trees where they have apple and plum and pear all on the same base. But that would be forbidden, wouldn't it?
You mean to plant it?
No, you've got the rootstock.
I said, you're asking if it's forbidden to eat it or to plant it?
I suppose both, really.
No, it's never forbidden to eat it.
Not forbidden to eat.
No.
So but you can't buy one of those trees and plant it in your garden.
Not so straightforward. I would definitely ask a shayla.
Because you see them advertised. I've always sort of left them alone because I thought it wasn't.
Okay, I don't know the answer. It's definitely a shayla. Otherwise, you were planning on planting such a tree in your backyard.
We're not going to have a back garden after 2 weeks' time, was it, again?
Be mashana makim, mashana mazel l'toiva v'lebrach. So that is, now we haven't mentioned the still. Why haven't we mentioned the still? Because there is nothing in the still kingdom that is automatically, naturally forbidden. You could take a stone or a brick and say, this brick is my God. I'm going to bow to it and offer sacrifices to it. And then you make it forbidden. You make it into Avodah Zarah. But that's taking something and making it forbidden. But there's nothing that is naturally forbidden from the still kingdom. You can have vegetables and animals that are naturally forbidden, but there's nothing naturally forbidden from the still kingdom.
No, it's not alive.
Huh?
Not alive.
It's not alive, but, and therefore, in the next chapter, when we speak about Klipas Noiga, we're going to mention examples of Klipas Noiga from the human, which is the Nefesh Habamis and the Aviyid. We're going to mention from the animal, which is kosher animals. We're going to mention from the vegetable, which is kosher vegetable, and we'll mention from the still. But when it comes to Shalosh Klipas Hatmeis, there is no still. The reason for that is because Klipa is Yeshus, full of itself. Ego. Kedusha is bitter. So the still, by nature, is buffled. It's subservient, unless you step on it. It doesn't blow its own trumpet. So therefore, its nature of subservience and humility doesn't allow it to be naturally shalosh klipas hatmeis.
There's no spirit in the mineral either.
Well, there is a spirit in the sense that there is the godly energy that creates it from nothing to something. That's in everything, right? And in the case of the vegetable, so there are vegetables that have the godly energy creating from nothing to something from klipas noiga, And they're vegetables that have that godly energy creating them, something which shows Klipas Atmeis, as it is in the case of the Arla, Kilei HaKenim. But when it comes to the still, there is nothing that is automatically, naturally shows Klipas Atmeis. The worst it can go is Klipas Noig. Yes.
Even a Christian symbol.
So it wasn't born that way. Somebody made it that way, right? So you can make it into Shalosh Klipas Atmeis, but it's not automatically born that way or created that way. Follow what I'm saying? In other words, I'll give you another example. If somebody cooks meat and milk together, yeah, so it becomes forbidden. But it's not naturally Shalosh Klipas Atmeis. He's taken two things that are Klipas Noiga, put them together, and his actions have made them into Shalosh Klipas Atmeis.
Yes.
So that can happen in the still world as well. But for something to be automatically in its natural state, Shalosh Klipas Atmeis, that doesn't exist in the realm of the still.
So why do you have to these things made from glass or from food?
I don't know if that's why.
There's examples of the Christian. We've been on the continent and we came across a festival that's happening where soldiers come back from stage and if they were worshipping, paraded a piece of wood which is supposed to have had God's blood on it.
Not a good idea. Stay away from it.
Actually, very quickly, there was a church in Edgware which pinned to a tree was a sign saying, "Come and worship here." You can imagine the comments that came out. Worship the tree.
Okay. Now that is as far as things are concerned. Now there's also actions, speech, and thought. There could be action, speech, and thought that are Shalosh Klipas Atmeis. There could be action, speech, and thought which are Klipas Noiga. So now that we're enumerating everything that comes against this life force from Shalosh Klipas Atmeis, he concludes v'chein kiyum v'chayis kol ha'ma'aseh dibur ha'machshava shel kol shasal loises abanfein. Similarly, the sustenance and the life force of any deed, speech, or thought which is a transgression of the 365 negative commandments and their branches, meaning the 365 negative commandments are the biblical commandments, and their branches referring to the rabbinic offshoots of those biblical commandments. So any act, speech, or thought which is a violation of one of the 365 negative commandments or their offshoots, which are rabbinic violations, would be considered Shalosh Klipas Atmeis. Meshakasav Sham Seif Perikei, as it says over there at the end of chapter 5. So basically, in a nutshell, anything which is not Kedusha is automatically Klipa. But in Klipa itself, we have two categories. We have that which, and I think one of the easiest ways to explain it, we have two mitzvahs that are quite similar. We have the mitzvah of believing in Hashem, Anochi Hashem Elokeinu. We have the mitzvah of Achdus Hashem, only Hashem and nothing else. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. So when you say the mitzvah is to accept Hashem's authority, Anochi Hashem Elokeinu, so something which doesn't rebel against Hashem's authority is okay. So if I want to sit down and play a game of Scrabble, not a problem. It's not a prohibition. However, when you say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Hashem is one and only, there's nothing else besides Him, that means that my entire existence is devoted to the oneness of Hashem. And there's no room for anything which is not, because if I give room for something which is not part of the oneness of Hashem, then I'm saying there's something else except Hashem. So if I'm playing Scrabble in order to clear my mind that I should be able to serve Hashem properly, that's Kol Masechel Hashem Shamayim. But if it's because I want to play Scrabble, that's Klipas Noiga. So it's not Shalosh Klipas Atmeis because it's not forbidden. But it's not subservience to the oneness of Hashem, and therefore it's Klipas Noiga.
And then what consequences?
The consequences are that at the time that you're doing something which is not for the sake of serving Hashem, you become a vehicle and a chariot to Klipa. When you do something which is the service of Hashem, then you become a chariot and a vehicle to Kedusha. When you do something which is not for the service of Hashem, you become a chariot and a vehicle to Klipa. In other words, the truth is there's only Hashem and nothing else. The fact that there are things around that declare their own existence is really a lie. Because there is nothing that's not only about Hashem. So you are supporting this force that negates Einod Muvada, that negates the fact that there's nothing else except Hashem. So when you're living your life in a way that everything is godliness, and you're completely devoted to godliness, then you are supporting the concept of Ein Milvado. That is in sync with what we saw at Sinai. At Sinai, we weren't just told this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do. At Sinai, we were shown that Ata Hareisol Adas, you were shown to see Ki Hashem Hu Elokim, that the Almighty is God. Ein Milvado, there's nothing else except Him. Right? So I can say, okay, the Almighty is God. I'm not going to disobey any of His instructions, but as far as I'm concerned, I can give Him, about 3 hours a day, and then I want another 21 hours a day to do my own thing. So then you're not Ein Milvado. Yeah? And if you say He is everything, this is my life is all about. That's Ein Milvado.
I think quite a lot of people are doing that.
I didn't do a survey. I know that when Mashiach comes, it'll be the obvious reality that everybody will recognize that Ein Milvado. And until then, we're very fortunate to study Chassidus, so we know the secret of Ein Milvado, and we try to the best of our ability to adjust our lives to this in this way. The good news is the Mashiach is coming very, very soon.
It's a very fine line because people, they go and they have other interests. And they could always say,
Yeah, so there's a klal like this. Menart keinem nicht. You don't fool anyone, chutz sich, except yourself. Yeah? Is a kunst a nar and a nar? Is it a chachma to fool a fool? Right? So, we have to demand of ourselves a certain amount of honesty. To fool oneself you don't get any prizes for fooling yourself. Right? A person can pick up a fork and say, I'm not eating this for the benefit of my body. I'm only eating it l'shem shamayim. Question is, are you eating it l'shem shamayim? Doesn't matter what you're saying. What's the truth? Be honest. So if you're doing it l'shem shamayim, then as we're going to learn in the next chapter, you're elevating klipas neiga to kedusha. If you're not eating it l'shem shamayim, especially if you're eating it for your own taivus, then you're dragging down klipas neiga into shalosh klipas hatmeis. And it has to do with what the truth is. Yes.
So you pick up this book, and you're going to eat. Point is, are you going to make the right bracha? Are you going
We have this discussion all the time.
I know, it's like playing Scrabble. Yes, I'm going to play Scrabble, but surely I should at the same time think of the words I want to put down.
Yeah, so the point is like this. What is really important to my life? I'll give you an analogy. Let's say I have a person that's running a marathon. Yeah, and he really wants to be the winner. An Olympic marathon is running. He really wants to be the winner. And he's got 6 months to work it out. So during this 6 months, he eats a special diet. It's going to make him most fit to be able to successfully do that marathon. He's going to sleep every night exactly the amount of time that he needs to sleep to be most fit to run the marathon. He's going to exercise exactly as he needs. He's going to train exactly as he does. Right? Everything he's going to do in his life is running around that central it's turning around that central goal in his life, which is to win that Olympic marathon. Right? Because that's the most important thing in his life. And during those 6 months, there's nothing else that exists in his life which doesn't, in one way or another, enable him to get closer to that goal. Right? So if we are completely taken by the mission of Kol Yemei Chayecha L'Havim L'Beis HaMashiach, all the days of your life are to bring Mashiach. Or Ani Lo Nivrei Shiel L'Shamash L'Speni, I was not created for any other purpose other than to serve my Creator. Right? So I'm here to make Yimalech Rein Hashem Es Kol Ha'aretz, that the glory of Hashem should fill the land. That's my only goal in life. So automatically, everything I'm going to do in one way or another is going to contribute to that goal. Be directed to that goal. If I'm doing things that are not directed at that goal, that means I'm not passionately driven in that direction. I've got other agendas. So ultimate Yiddishkeit is to be fascinated about your Yiddishkeit to the point where that's your sole agenda. And everything else that you do is only a means to be able to achieve that goal. Get it? So then your Yiddishkeit is Chukas is engraved in you, not just written on you. Right? And I tell the story, it's a fundraiser story, but I think it brings out the point quite well. That there was once a chicken and a PIG walking down the street. and they saw a sign that said bacon and eggs. So the chicken said to the PIG, he said, look at this. It's the two of us that's sustaining the world. So the PIG said to the chicken, you comparing yourself to me? From you, they're only asking for a donation. From me, they want a commitment. You get it? So the question is, are you here to give a donation or are you here to make a commitment? That's why I said it's a good fundraiser story. But at the end of the day, the question we have to ask ourselves is how is our Yiddishkeit relate to our very existence? Is it a donation? I'm a human being who makes donations to Yiddishkeit. I daven once in a while, I study Torah once in a while, I give tzedakah once in a while, do a mitzvah once in a while, I give many donations. Or am I a human being whose existence is Yiddishkeit? Is it written letters or is it engraved letters? Okay, we'll hold it over here. Yes?